Okay, this is a video to teach you how to make a different type of plot when you have both an experimental and theoretical curve, but you're not using a trend line. You're generating your own theoretical curve. Just a second here. Okay, so let me start with a screen share. Here we go. So here's the guidelines of kind of what we're going to be thinking about here. Sorry about that. We'll go through that one at a time, but let's just start really quick. Let's say I've got this theoretical data and this experimental data. If you're curious where I got this from, again, I just use this theoretical formula that you see right here. Here are my constants. And so you could see that when I plug this in, I use that information and I filled down. So we've got the constants here. Let me just adjust the sig figs just because that bothers me. So there we go. We've got some sig figs. We can worry about that later. If you needed to do a percent difference, obviously, here's one formula for that. There are many different ones. I could do equals the experimental values. Those would be ones obtained with sensors in the lab or something, minus the theoretical values, what we predict from some theoretical equation. Then we're going to divide by the theory. Some people do experiment plus theory divided by 2 on the bottom, the average. It's fine too. And then you could hit enter. Excuse me. I like to leave the minus sign on. Whoops. Let me see here. Oh, yeah, we get a divide by 0 error here, so maybe we just ignore that one. But we could discuss this more later. But so if you're curious, you could go like this. And if you wanted to show this as a percent, you could even go in here and show it as a percentage. Now, watch out for this. Usually we round these off to 1 sig fig, but sometimes in certain cases, whatever. More on that in lab. All right, so there's the percent difference if you need to know how to do that. Great. Oh, let me put that back in just so I got some space here. So now let's get to the guts of this. We want to make a plot here, and this is some ugly formula. If we just try to make a plot and insert a trend line, this is not going to work out because we don't have a trend line for this equation. Now, there are advanced methods for doing this. For example, you could use like a Levenberg-Marquardt algorithm or something to do a curve fit. And we could talk about statistics and errors associated with that. But for now, let's just try and get an idea if this theory is modeled well or is a good model for our experimental data. A great test of that is to plot them both and see what they look like. So let me just highlight everything. So again, I'm using the white cursor. I'm highlighting it in one swoop. We hit insert, and we're going to select the curves here. Maybe I'm going to go like this. All right. And so I could see here's some data. Great. Now, some things that we're going to want to do. Let me just get this smaller here so I could see it a little bit better. And what we want to do is try and walk through here. So we've selected the data. We used a scatter plot, not a line plot. Again, if you look here, the difference here is if you insert, this is the scatter plot. Always use that. This is the line plot. If I tried to do the same thing with a line plot, it gets all messed up. Notice it. Look at these increment sizes. In the real world, you may not measure your increments at equal distances. And so this is a totally bogus looking plot. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to hit undo. We want to use a scatter plot. Now, what is the first thing you want to do? You want to change the font size. If you're giving a presentation, you immediately want to change this to 18-point font. Now, I'm just going to leave it at 10 for right now, but I do want to change the font type. So let's do TIM for Times New Roman. And then, so the reason you do this first is any formatting will be lost if you change the font. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to just click somewhere random on the edge, click black to make all these black. I'm going to get rid of these grid lines. We don't need them. All right, I'm going to make these axes, right click, format axis. And let's do this. I want to just make those axes pop. So I'm going to make those black. And I'm going to click the other axis. Whoops, regular click. I'm going to hit Control Y to repeat that action. Now, it's starting to get messy. Which data set is which? All right. So let me click here. And let's see. Notice if I click on the orange data points here, it tells me that's the theory. Now I come over here into my list. I want to use a line for the theory. So I'm going to right click, format data series, and this is a little bit tricky. So what I want to do here is I want to go to no, let's see, I want to use a solid line. And depending on what you're doing, you may or may not want to use a smooth line. So you could use a discrete line here because we calculated it from a discrete number of points. Marker options, let's do none. And so the idea now, even if I just do this, this is a lot easier to communicate with people because I could see that the line is the theory and the dots are the experiment. So if the dots are close to the line, the experiment is a good match for the theory, at least visually, or at least to some extent. Errors, we could discuss another time. Now, okay, there's a few things we should always do. In this case, we may or may not want to use a title, so I'll just stick one in here. Let's say B versus, I think it was X in this case. I write everything without the formatting, then I go back and format it, Control I. Now I need to add some axis labels. And notice this one's floating off in space over here, and this one's down here. This is terrible. So I'm going to also move this legend up here because it's driving me nuts. We'll fix that at the end. So personally, I don't really like this rotated one. So I'm going to right click, format, and then just kind of mess around in here and look until you find it. Aha, rotate all the way. Let's go horizontal. And so this should be the magnetic field in Tesla. Great. Obviously, what we're plotting here doesn't really matter. Your symbols might be different. And notice this title probably doesn't really make sense, but I'm going to stick this over here for now. This one was going to be X in meters, let's say. Again, how do I know this? Again, this is going to be the x-axis. In this case, X happens to actually be X. The y-axis is both of these B fields. So now in this case, I don't know. We don't really need a title unless there's a reason for it. But so I'm going to actually delete this title in this case because the axis labels tell us everything we need to know. It's B. Now, there might be a reason to put a title. You could stick it back on later. Now let's do something with this legend here. So we can rearrange this. And this is kind of goofy. So I'm going to right click on some of the data. I'm going to hit select data and I'm going to change these labels. Now, you could do this in many other ways, but this is one thing you could do. I'm going to click edit this and I could give it a name. So now notice this is notice the Y values are right here. The X, and so that means I'm looking at the theory, right? So let's call that theory. Now I could go to here. I may have switched these, but I think I did just switch them. I was misreading it. This should be the theory. Sorry about that. I'm tired. It's been a long day. So let's go back to here and edit it. We could call this experiment. All right. And so now if I go back, this makes it even more obvious. Now, another thing that you could do if you're doing a presentation or cutting and pasting this into a document, you could also do this. You could hit Control C, and if you're going to paste this into a document, sorry, let me get this crap out of here. If you paste this into here, once it's into here, you could actually get rid of this legend entirely, and then you could put in some text labels right here. So for example, I can't believe I just did that because I could have cut and paste, but whatever. So you could actually say like this, B, whoops, I'm going to hit Alt equals. Come on. Ah, all right, but you could label it in there, and I'll show you that trick later. But yeah, you could actually label them in here. That's just a little extra. All right, so let's get back to here. Let's see where we're at here. We've got our axis labels. We've got our fonts. We've done this. Oh, something that I forgot to do right now. This is visually a little bit difficult for people to see because I didn't add tick marks. So right here, you want to use light grid lines or tick marks. So let's put some tick marks in here to see what this looks like. Format axis. And let's put in some tick marks. And so for this one, maybe we'll do inside. Maybe I want to do some minor ones, but maybe not. Let's just leave it at that. And then up here, let's do some tick marks on this axis. I'll just click on it. Come on. And hit Control Y. It'll repeat the last action. Okay, maybe not. I don't know what I did. So let's do, oops, let's do these ones cross. All right, so now you can see those pretty well. And now your grid lines, we don't need them because we've got tick marks. If you do grid lines, just to be clear, if you're going to add grid lines, we could click on this axis, right click, add major grid lines, but it could get kind of distracting because they're so in your face. So if you're going to do grid lines, at least make them small, maybe a light gray and maybe a dash. That way they're way in the background. Now you could do that for both axes here. I'm just going to redo that really quick. Dashed and what? Let's see. Let's do a light color. Oops. Oh, I had it on the wrong button. Sorry. Let's undo that. Well, anyways, that's how you could do that for the grid lines. Sorry about that. I made a mistake there. But we don't even need those grid lines if we have the tick marks, and that's kind of standard these days. So sorry I made that mistake there. So let's take a look here. Let's go through our checklist. We know how to select. We've done this. We've done the font size and colors. We know that the experiment, we're going to use dots with no line. And then for the theory, we're going to use that. Axis labels, we've done that. Variables are italicized, but units are not. If you need subscripts or superscripts or Greek letters, there you go. Tick marks or very light grid lines. And now if you get this set up, now we're up to here. You could write, if you're going to make a couple of these, maybe you want to save it. So you could right click and save it as a template. And so if you wanted to do that, you could actually come in here and save it as a template, whatever you want. We'll say this is greatest plot ever. Great. And then the advantage of this is the next time you make a plot, let's say we do another one, we insert, make a plot. We'll just stick this. Now we've lost all our formatting, but if you change the chart type and you pick one of your templates, you can get all that back. I forget which one we were doing. Greatest plot ever, I think is what we we're doing. And notice that means you don't have to start from scratch. You still have to do some work, but not all of it. So this is a good trick to know to save a template. Okay, so there's that. After you've saved the template, then we can come back in here. You should always do this step. Always adjust the bounds to reduce wasted space. Like, look at this case. Why are we going to go all the way out to 6 when the data stops? Basically, it runs between -5 and 5. So let's go to here. We'll right click, format axis, and let's just manually stick this -5 to 5. And then look, why would we go by 2-unit increments? Why not go by ones if we're going to do that? All right. Now, if you don't like that, maybe you'd say, well, maybe I want to go by 2.5s. That's fine too. But then you might consider putting the minor grid lines or something in there. So, and then keep in mind, if you have too many or too little sig figs, you can actually change the sig figs here. You can just come down into here and you can change the number of decimal places. So let's say we don't want to list that to as many sig figs. Maybe that makes this plot. There's a reason maybe you want to do this depending on what data set you collected. Here we might want to display all three. You could also argue you don't want to display all 3 decimal places because it's hard to read the graph to that many decimal places. But you could also argue maybe you want to indicate to the viewer that's how many sig figs you had, whatever. So sig figs we'll talk about later. But this is getting most of the formatting done. So you could change the sig figs if you need to. Let's see. Now, again, we may not even want to put the legend on here or the title. So again, if you're putting this into a presentation, you might come over here, Control C, and let's say, again, we'll dump this into here. Whoops, let me get out. Let me make this smaller. Let's get rid of this one. And we'll dump this one into here. And you're like, oh, shoot, I don't want that border. You could actually change some of the stuff in here. So you could do no outline. So that should get rid of the border there. That way you don't have that pesky little border. And then in this case, instead of having this legend, maybe we want to get rid of this legend. And we could literally do insert a shape, a text box. We'll draw this here. We'll align this up later. And then you could say alt equals. And then you could say the theoretical equation was B0, B as a function of x was equal to B0. And I think what was it? It was, just a second, let me get a fraction here. Sorry, I didn't have this queued up. I deleted it. You could say x squared. And then this was what? X squared plus L. I think it was capital L. Right. And so we got this, and you could even color code this to match the line. So if this line was, let's say this line was red. Whoops. Let's say this line was red. Maybe I want to color code this to red. And then a couple of other things I'll do is if with a text box, just so I don't have all these borders, we could do format this. Sorry, this is all kind of extra bells and whistles. We could say no line. That takes away the line. We could say no fill. That way it doesn't cover up stuff. And then the idea is you could drag this and stick this right next to the curve. And so instead of needing a legend, oh, maybe we want to say this is B theory, right? And so obviously you could line this up to fit wherever you want. And so now it's pretty clear the red line is the theoretical equation, and that's the equation. So now people don't even have to read the legend. You could do that as well. All right. So I think we kind of went through all that. I'm just going to go through it one more time just to double check. Sorry. You could probably stop watching now, but just in case, let me see if there's anything I forgot. So one thing I guess I should have said in here explicitly. Oh, come on. Come on now. Now my mouse isn't working. There we go. So somewhere in here, you got to do sig figs. I don't know where to put that, but yeah, you got to do sig figs too. I think that was the only thing I missed. All right, let's go.